Hey guys, it's Admiral Seabass. Welcome back to Operation FailSafe and the wrap-up video because after turn 9.3, we all decided to call it a game. The NATO alliance was not seeing a path to victory, and they consulted with us in the Warsaw Pact alliance and also with China, and it was agreed that we would conclude the game as we didn't see any outcome that wasn't going to be a Warsaw Pact alliance victory. I think even if the U.S. had forged ahead with SDI and gotten strategic nuclear release, that option was not going to be as worthwhile for them, primarily because of the Soviet buildup here. I would say as a Soviet player, even if the U.S. had gotten nuclear release, I had so many airborne and planes and air units here that I probably would have at that point been willing to pull the trigger on an invasion of the mainland U.S. And I don't know how the U.S. could have recovered from that. So the victory points. At the end of 9.3, I actually calculated the victory points because me and Knights Templar were planning his 9.5 turn. So I wanted to see where things stood. And at the end of turn 9.3, with all the subtractions and everything, I had the victory points at Warsaw Pact Alliance 16, NATO Alliance 3.75, and China at 0. And so yeah, that's it. The war's over. I want to talk a little bit about my strategy in the game as the Soviet Global Command. And so I had a couple of different priorities for Soviet Global Command. One was up here in Scandinavia, what I called Operation Nordic Hammer. I wanted to take out Sweden and Norway from the NATO alliance, and also Svalbard. Iceland came later and was a little opportunistic. But I had to invest quite a lot of IPP in Operation Nordic Hammer. We were playing with a new optional rule that gives Norway more units and requires NATO to keep those units in Norway. So I think this is probably more IPP than the Soviets have ever had to spend to take out Sweden and Norway, and it was successful. I will say I wish I'd attacked Sweden one turn earlier because I had a boatload of Marines and airborne sitting in Svealand. I think at the end of turn 3 or turn 4, and I was really afraid that NATO was going to counterattack into Svealand from Akersjö and Nordland and kill my Marines before they could take Denmark. And but that never happened, so I was happy about that. But yeah, Nordic Hammer, big success. The SRBMs definitely helped there too, that new optional unit that we were using. So yeah, that was priority number 1, was that Operation Nordic Hammer. I wouldn't say priority number. No, that wasn't my highest priority, but it was a big priority. I would say another priority I had was down here. What I called Operation Red Dawn was to fan the flames of the PRF and create as much havoc as I could down here in the Caribbean. Ozark Outpost did a really good job of taking PRF out and consolidating his forces to do that. However, he did leave Cuba untouched, and if you don't take out Cuba as the U.S. Global Command, then the Soviets can build Cuba up to the point where it's almost impregnable. Like you see here, I had Cuba starts with a fighter and 3 light infantry. I was able to get 2 more light infantry and an MBT in here with military aid. So that's 5 light infantry, a main battle tank, and a fighter just in Cuban forces. And then I started to move airborne in. I was able to get air units in eventually. And then I was able to take Puerto Rico. And by taking Puerto Rico, I got an air base, which I could build air units at, which I built a fighter there on turn 9.3. I did take French Guiana briefly, and then I think he took it back quickly. And I will give Ozark credit in terms of setting up defensive forces here and a defensive shield here that made, say, Nicaragua pretty tough to think about taking. I thought about taking central United States very early on, but that would have started a nuclear war because of this missile silo. But I think when I took Panama, that was a backbreaker because Panama gives me a +4 bonus and it costs the U.S. Global Command a -8 bonus. And so the U.S. having -8 from here and then also losing 8 from oil tankers was just kind of crippling to the U.S. My eventual goal here was to take Colombia, Venezuela, and French Guiana and try to hold them by the end of the game because that would have been 6 victory points just right there from those 3. So the other thing that I think I was expecting Ozark to do was to use at least 1 or 2 of these frigates to put Puerto Rico out of supply and maybe put Panama out of supply because the Soviets can operate from Cuba because Cuba has an army base and that gives Soviets supply to operate out of Cuba. But supply could have been cut off to Puerto Rico and Panama by putting, say, a frigate here or here. But that would have meant these frigates couldn't be moved up north, which is where I think he wanted to move at least 2 of them to help out, to keep my fleet bottled up off Iceland. So this also, this strategy ended up being somewhat opportunistic because I did not want Ozark meddling around in the Mediterranean and hurting Warsaw Pact's victory points here. So I wanted to try to keep his focus and attention over here. I think he gambled and just said, well, Admiral Seabass, do your worst because I'm going to go muck around. And so I tried to do my worst, but it was still tough. I mean, Soviets operating out of Cuba is very tough to pull off logistically because you have to airlift units in, you have to air to redeploy units in, and the Soviets have a limited capacity to do that. So you have to be very strategic about what you do. And as an example of that, like, I figured he wanted to take these 2 frigates up here, and he wanted to use this frigate down here. So I tried to make it hard for him to make a choice. I figured he wanted to use this frigate and put it here and put my fighter out of supply so that I couldn't use it in combat next turn. That's why I moved the air cav into Panama, because then Panama's in supply and I can still use my air cav. So he either had to put 1 frigate here or 1 frigate here. He couldn't do both and put them both out of supply. So anyway, that's what I was trying to do there. But this was fun for me. I'm not sure how fun it was for Ozark. But I feel like I tied down a lot of units in IPP here. And I feel like that was kind of critical to our overall winning effort, at least on this side of the map. Give Ozark a lot of credit for investing in, say, paying off these oil tankers, that oil tanker. And I think he was coming over here, and that's where we'll go next. Probably my number 1 priority was the random event here with India and Pakistan. And I will say, like, I felt like India. I got very unfortunate with India in this game, especially early on, with some of the border attacks that were made, and the dice rolls were just awful against India. And my number 1 objective down here was to kill the oil tankers in I-6 and to leverage, operating out of India to do that. And my secondary objective would have been eventually to launch an airborne air cav and an attack helicopter assault from North Pakistan and South Pakistan into the United Arab Emirates and into Saudi Arabia. But because I lost so much against Pakistan early on, that never really materialized, or I was never able to do that. I was eventually able to kill these oil tankers, but Ozark pulled his fleet down here to I-3, and I felt like I needed to kill that fleet, and I definitely had the strength to do it. But again, I felt like I got diced in that attack as well, and that really set me back. And Ozark really took advantage of that really well by the fact that he won the battle. He got a free minor shipyard. He very smartly put it in Suez, and he was going to start building ships and feeding them into here. And I think he was going to, or at least what I assumed he was going to do was try to take back I-6 in the oil tankers, which is why I made these purchases on my last turn. What he could have also done was moved his fleet back into the Med, where I couldn't go, and he could have started trying to help NATO retake Turkey, Greece, maybe even Italy, etc. That's why we decided to start putting pressure on Spain, was to counteract that. But I wasn't able to do nearly as much down here. Oh, the other reason I couldn't go after UAE and Saudi, I felt like Soviet Far East Command needed some support, because War Doctor and PAC was causing all kinds of problems here for the Soviet Far East Command. And so I really felt like I wanted to give some more units to Knights Templar to help with that. And I do believe those units really did help him. And I think they also caused an attack from China that China felt like it needed to make, because those units were also threatening its southern frontier and its missile silos. So I was very glad I did that, but it meant that it was going to be a struggle for me to ever take UAE or Eastern Saudi from Pakistan, because I just couldn't spare the IPP. So that was my other big priority. Another huge priority I had was down here. I called this Operation Heart of Darkness. In Scenario 3, Zaire, which is a Chinese ally, starts with a lot of stuff, and China has victory points that it can get here in Africa if it is willing to invest the IPP in building out of China, or out of Zaire, and doing that, as we've seen in past games. I did not want to let Captain G do that, and so I very intentionally started putting light infantry units, Soviet light infantry units, into Angola, which was the cheapest way that I could attack Zaire, since it borders. I also started putting Soviet fighters in here, and I started giving Angola a small amount of aid just in case the U.S. would come up. But I also made my intentions very clear to the NATO alliance of what I was intending to do here. And the fact that I bought light infantry, instead of, say, upgrading them to air cav or sending Soviet airborne down here, which could threaten South Africa or Nigeria, I made it very obvious what my target was by what I was sending. And, if somebody doesn't try to stop, I should say this, the Soviets are the only ones who can really stop China in Africa in Scenario 3. And if the Soviets don't take out Zaire, then that's a base of operations that China can use to spread around here and get victory points. So I was able to do that, but I'll have to say I spent a lot of IPP down here, and it was barely enough. Like, if both Captain G's early gen fighters from Zaire had hit on round 1, I probably wouldn't have been able to take it. So even after investing, I think, probably 30 plus IPP, I still barely took Zaire. But I was glad I did, because that ultimately cost Captain G the chance to get 6 victory points in the game. So yeah, that was Operation Heart of Darkness. I guess my last and final priority was up here, which is, I called Operation Red Storm, which was just helping the Warsaw Pact, or supporting them in their war against NATO. We saw the U.S. trying to help NATO. There's some sea lift sitting there. And the U.S. did get quite a bit of units into NATO. So I wanted to do the same thing. I didn't want to overdo it, because I didn't want to ignore my own victory conditions and going after my own victory points. But I did want to send some help. And that was land units early on. A lot of my units that I used in Operation Nordic Hammer were able to come down then and start reinforcing. And I think the Soviet units were helpful in helping the Warsaw Pact keep Bavaria and northern Germany very early on. But our strategy with Sky Marshal early on, given that the event was down here in Yugoslavia, our strategy for him was just to hold Bavaria and northern Germany by the end of the game. And Italy, Greece, and Turkey were our primary objectives for his other victory points. And so eventually, because the NATO Air Force was building up so incredibly, I just started buying SAMs and started sending the SAMs over here. Those really helped Warsaw Pact, I think. But I think, for me, the turning point in the entire game was very early on when Sky Marshal built up a bidirectional force here in Romania of airborne, air cav, attack helicopters, early gen fighters, medium bombers, and that force could hit either Marmara or it could hit Lazio or both. And so I felt like one of the turning points in the game was when Flak 88 abandoned Marmara in favor of Lazio. We actually liked it when he did that because we thought it would be relatively easy for Warsaw Pact to take and hold at least 2 Turkey land zones by the end of the game, which would give them 2 VPs for controlling Turkey. What we didn't expect was that we'd have a chance to take both Lazio and Marmara on the first turn of war, what we call War Turn 1. And so we were able to do that. We were super pleased with that. Of course, Flak 88 put a crap ton of damage on this minor army base in Lazio, which was a problem because we could never pay it off. It's like 12 damage. But then I think the other turning point in the game was when I decided to use my Soviet fleets in the Black Sea, which could sail through because Marmara was controlled by Warsaw Pact, and then my Soviet fleets up here to hit the NATO and basically destroy the NATO fleets, I think on War Turn 1 for the Soviets. I feel like Warsaw Pact taking so many land zones in the Med and getting so much IPP, especially the Lazio bonus, and then NATO losing their fleet. I feel like those two things was really both their fleets, but north and south, was really the turning point in the game. And then NATO having no fleet, but the U.S. really committing to sea lift operations in the Atlantic is why mid-game I decided to either take Iceland, or I was going to rip the Band-Aid off and take Scotland, southern England, and western France. I ultimately decided on Iceland because Warsaw Pact was doing well enough that I didn't want to imperil them getting in a nuclear war with NATO. So I eventually decided on Iceland. Ozark very nicely defended A3 and further Soviet infiltration into the Atlantic, because one of my plans here was once I took Iceland, the SOSUS zones here are dead, meaning that Soviet subs can stream through here without penalty. That would have made it hard for Ozark to do sea lift, but he very smartly guarded that and saw that as well. And then finally I decided when Knights Templar was playing for Sky Marshal, we decided that we wanted to take out Rhineland and Benelux. And so that's what was going to happen is Warsaw Pact was probably going to hit Rhineland next after the Soviets were able to come down here and take Benelux. So anyway, a lot of fun. Great guys to play with. Great game. So what's next? I'm going to pick all this up, and then I'm going to start working on version 2 of Global War 1985. The current version that you all are playing is version 1.5. That will continue to be supported. There are going to be expansions that are coming out. I've been talking to Doug at Historical Board Gaming. The first expansion that's going to come out, I think pretty soon, is ASW Helicopters. The other one that's going to come out, it should be after that sometime, is called Battleships and Battlecruisers. So you guys can continue to enjoy version 1.5. I will continue to support it. We will keep the clarifications and any errata updated for that, but I'm going to start working on version 2. the goal of version 2 is simplification and simplifying and making it more fun, making it even easier for new people to get into the games, but for you guys who've already invested, making it more fun and faster to play. We are going to use the same map, so there will not be a new map. In version 2, we will change some of the play aids. The dashboards, I think, will have some small changes. The reference sheets, I think, will have some small changes. The setups, etc. But I think a lot of you guys don't like a lot of map changes, so we're intending to keep this map the same for version 2 of the game. We will incorporate some of the expansion units into version 2, like ASW helicopters, battleships, battlecruisers. Those will go into the game. I think the most fun thing we're working on is this game has like 9 pretty big random events. We are going to try to design more of a sandbox random event concept that, say, one of the ones we're talking about is, the Soviets using Syria as a hub of operations to start doing insurgencies, etc., in the Middle East. Maybe in another one they could use Iraq. In another one, maybe they can use Angola. And just giving a little more choice to the players as to what they can do in the pre-war DEFCON escalation period. So that's one of the things we're really excited to work on and do. So with that, I will let you all go. Really appreciate your support for the game. And again, congratulations to all the other players in Operation FailSafe. This is Admiral Seabass signing off.